Today, we hear a beautiful gospel reading that is a great reminder of how we should live. And before we get to that, as I was thinking of this past week, it seems like more than ever, we've experienced tragedy in the year of 2017. We see terrorist attacks all over the world, whether here in the States or overseas. We hear of earthquakes in Mexico. We hear of hurricanes here, Texas, Puerto Rico. We hear of the loss of our loved ones. We hear about the fires in California. And it seems, again, like more than ever in previous years, something about this year is different. And in these tragic times, we see this darkness that occurs. And it's sad to actually see that. But in that darkness comes a wonderful opportunity for the light of Christ to come forth. It allows for the opportunity for us as human beings, as God's creation, to love. Because while we might experience that sadness in those dark times, what do we really see? We hear of all the good stories of people making human chains in Texas, saving people from cars that are in the midst of floodwaters. We hear of people volunteering their time to put out the fires in California. We hear about people risking their lives going to completely devastated areas in Mexico from the earthquakes, pulling and sifting through the rubble to find people, whether they're alive or dead, or just to bring them to their loved ones. We hear of all of these opportunities where love overcomes that darkness. And today we have a prime example of how this works and how it doesn't work. And it reminds us, for us, what can we do, as we might not have experienced much of these things, even though we're in the pathway of a hurricane. But out of all of these tragedies, what can we do as we sit here today? How can we notice the people that surround us? How can we experience what they're feeling as well, to have that sympathy? Because we have to understand something. The people around us, whether we put up a good front or not, are dealing with their own struggles. They're dealing with their own tragedies. They're dealing with their own loss. And sometimes all you see is smiles. You don't see the hurt in their eyes. You don't see that because of all of the boundaries we put up for one another. But it's our duty to reach out to our loved ones, to reach out to our neighbor, because that's, in this gospel today, the prime example of what didn't happen. And as we hear in today's gospel about the rich man and Lazarus, we have the rich man who lived sumptuously every day. He ate whatever he had fine clothes, he had a beautiful home, whatever it is, and right outside of the gate of his compound, let's say, there was a poor man, and not just one, but I'm sure there was many, but there was a poor man named Lazarus who didn't have anything, who wanted simply just the crumbs from the master's table, just the crumbs from that table. That's all he wanted. He didn't want a whole meal. He didn't want $20, just the crumbs. That's all. And what do we hear in today's gospel as we just read it? We hear a man, plainly speaking, without even any type of identification. We don't even know who he is, because his life was so consumed with everything that he put in his life from his wealth. And it made him think, I don't need God. My success doesn't come from him. My success comes from, I either was born into this family, which we don't necessarily know where he gets his wealth from, or he worked hard. He doesn't need God. He has himself. That's the biggest problem with him. The sin isn't that he's rich. The sin is that he's distracted by accessing more and more and more and acquiring more and more and more wealth, where it literally consumes him to the point where people don't even know who he is. But then we're given the identification, we're given the name of a man, Lazarus. And again, we hear when things change, when they pass away, that he goes into heaven, that he goes into paradise. And it's not because he was poor, so God had mercy on him. No. It's because in his tragedy, in his struggle, he acknowledged God's presence to give him strength. It's easy in his mentality and in his state to question God, to doubt God, to look up in the sky and just say, why is this happening to me? That's easy. It's difficult to live day after day after day and look and see what could possibly have happened in his life, the blessings that in his eyes this man is receiving. But when things change, when we pass, he sees the ultimate blessing, and that's to be in the bosom of Abraham. And we hear from the man Lazarus, let him dip his finger into the water so that a drop may come and quench my thirst. Now he's feeling that pain. He's, for the lack of a better term, is sympathizing. Because in his earthly life, this man was poor. This man had nothing. But now in paradise, this man has everything. This man has everything that he could possibly want. And even in those times, he asks for that mercy. But it's unfortunate because there's a schism, there's a chasm that happens where no one can go over to the other side. So then he asks, all right, for me, I'm here, but go home to my brothers. If they see someone who's died and come back, they might be saved. And in that same essence, you've heard the words of the prophets. You've heard of Moses. If they heard of him too, they should follow whatever they say. And for us as Christians, we have Christ, and we have the prophets, and we have everybody. And what do we do to our brothers and sisters? What do we do to the people outside of these walls? What do we do to help people in their times of need? And when I speak of poverty in a sense of poorness, I don't necessarily mean just wealth either. There is a poverty of love. There is a poverty of being alone. There is a poverty of being just completely separate from a community. That too is poverty. It's the lack of something. And so when we look at the people around us, whatever they might be dealing with, there is that sense of poverty. And again, it's easy to just throw it all away into woe and our sorrows. And it's easy to just avoid people outside of here or even in the building. It's easy to do that because what their problems are not our problems. But it is our problem because we are a church family, because the people outside are also have an element of Christ in them, as we hear that everyone is made in the image and likeness of Christ. And that brings up an opportunity to speak of a concept that a professor of mine had introduced to us while we were in the seminary. And I know that I have myself spoken about this, maybe not from the pulpit, but in conversation, and it's this concept of hidden Christ. And that hidden Christ is a concept understanding that Christ is in all things, that God is in all things, and that we, as created in His image and likeness, have Christ in every single one of us. And this is something that we unfortunately forget all of the time. And he clarified it too as hidden Christ, meaning that they hide in all of us, but it's not that Christ hides. It's that we, whether consciously or unconsciously, hide Him. That we hide that light of Christ that's within all of us. And when things come to what they are, whether we're their struggles or joys or whatever they might be, we suppress Christ in our lives. Because when we're happy, we don't think to pray to God to give thanks. We just think of, oh, look at everything's good. I don't have to worry about anything, nothing, everything's okay. But in our good times, we pray to Christ to give thanks for the blessings of which we received. When we're sad, that's usually when people start praying to God. That's just the reality in my experience as a priest. It's in our hard times, in our difficult times, where we most pray to God, whether it's for our health or our struggles. And two things happen. Either those who pray are praying to God, or those who don't even see it worthy of even giving it a shot, because God put this struggle into their lives, and it's God's fault. Like I said, that's easy. But we have to overcome those difficulties. We have to ourselves unhide Christ and allow to see the hidden Christ in everybody. And that's the beauty of our challenge today. That's the beauty of the gospel, is that we have to really be more aware of the people who surround us, whether they're sitting next to us today in church, or whether it might be just outside, or whatever it is. We have to be more aware of the people that surround us, because in each of every single one of us is the light of Christ. And we have to help those kind of move the stuff away so that that light shines ever so brightly. Amen.